The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "As it was in the days of Noah, so will it be at the coming of the Son of Man. In those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, up to the day that Noah entered the ark. They did not know until the flood came and carried them all away. So will it be also at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be out in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, one will be taken and one will be left. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know on which day your Lord will come. Be sure of this, if the master of the house had known the hour of night when the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into. So too you also must be prepared, for at an hour you did not expect, the Son of Man will come." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord Jesus Christ.
When Lent is approaching, we all take time to plan for the extra things. What are we going to give up? What extra prayers are we going to say? What goals are we going to set up to help us to prepare for Easter? And I often wonder why we don't do the same thing for Advent. Maybe it's because we're so busy this time of year with harvest and shopping and cooking and baking and planning family gatherings and Christmas programs and concerts. There doesn't seem to be enough time in the day, and on top of all this, it doesn't even feel like it should be time for Christmas yet. The ice and the snow helped out a little bit yesterday morning, but where did the time go? It seemed like the school year just began. How is it even possible that it's Advent already? Which brings me back to that question. Why don't we treat Advent more like we treat Lent? Wouldn't that help us get ourselves ready for Christmas? Because I don't know about you, but by the end of Lent, I am really, really ready for it to be over. Perhaps if we prepared in the same way, Christmas wouldn't catch us off guard, and perhaps we would be really, really ready for Christmas, much like we are for Easter. And believe it or not, this is what the church has already set up for us. Advent is supposed to be like a miniature Lent, 2/3 length Lent. There used to be days in Advent where we were asked by the church to abstain from meat, including Christmas Eve. Growing up, we always had oyster soup on Christmas Eve, which is my favorite. But it was for that reason. It was sort of a leftover tradition of abstaining from meat. We hear a lot from Isaiah this time of year. He was our first reading that we just heard. And that's because many of Isaiah's prophecies point directly to Jesus being born and all of the circumstances surrounding it. But today's reading from Isaiah doesn't say anything regarding the birth of Jesus or hinting at his birth. In fact, the first 3 quarters of Advent, we wait until December 17th to really talk about the birth of Jesus in the liturgy, in terms of the readings and the prayers of the Mass. And that's because Advent, while it leads to the celebration of Christmas, it's not exactly about the birth of Jesus. It's about preparing ourselves to be in the presence of Jesus. It's about waiting for Jesus to come in our own lives. And our first reading from Isaiah, he sets the tone. So I think, it'd be worthwhile to look at the person of Isaiah. Who is he? What events prepared him to give such prophecies? When you're reading the Bible, it can be really confusing, especially with the books of the prophets. There are 17 prophetic books in the Old Testament, but they're not arranged in an order of chronology, like how and when they happened. They are arranged, strangely enough, from longest to shortest. So reading them straight through isn't going to give you like a clear picture of exactly what is happening in Israel. And to add even more confusion, more than one prophet are giving the same prophecies at the same time. And you'll see why that is. If we're going to have a little bit of historical context, so let's do that. So Isaiah lived during some of the most important events of the Old Testament that people might not be familiar with. We're all familiar with Adam and Eve and Noah and the ark and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Moses and the Israelites escaping from Egypt. We know about Judges and King David and King Solomon. But that's probably where 75% of our people, including Catholics, that's probably where our knowledge ends when it comes to the events of the Old Testament. But the problem is that King David and King Solomon lived about 1,000 years before Jesus did. So we're missing like an entire millennium of information that a lot of important things happened. So let's fill in that time gap, at least a portion of that time gap today. So King David's grandson was a king named Rehoboam. Very beautiful, rolls right off the tongue. But Rehoboam was such a terrible leader that it led to a civil war. And the result of this civil war was that the northern 10 tribes of the 12 tribes of Israel, the northern 10 tribes separated, and they formed their own nation. A little trickily, though, they called themselves Israel. And so what happened is that in the south, you had the tribe of Judah, which was the biggest of the 12 tribes, equaled the rest combined, basically. And the tribe of Judah stayed in Jerusalem. So the king of Jerusalem continued on for centuries and centuries, but the 10 northern tribes separated themselves. And so for the reason why it can be so confusing is because we usually think of the whole nation as Israel, but for a lot of the Old Testament, when it says Israel, it's not talking about the whole nation, it's only talking about the northern half. And the southern half would be called Judah. Isaiah lived a couple of hundred years after this split between Judah and Israel. And his prophecy was a lengthy amount of time, from about the year 735 BC to the year 685 BC. The years count backwards when we're talking BC. So basically 50 years of prophecies from Isaiah. And at this time, there were basically four major nations at play in the Bible's narrative and sort of the story of the Old Testament. And I think it'd be a lot easier if I could show you on a map, but I don't have a map here. So you just kind of have to keep this straight in your mind, these four different kingdoms that we're going to be talking about. So you had the kingdom of Judah in the south, the southern kingdom. The capital was Jerusalem. The king of the south was always in the line of David up until the end of that kingdom. And then north of the kingdom of Judah, you had the kingdom of Israel, which was at one time the 10 tribes of Israel that separated themselves from Jerusalem. And the capital of Israel is Samaria, which would later become the Samaritans. But at this point in time, the capital is Samaria. And then to the north of Israel, you have a nation they're not Israelites at all. There might be some, living among them. But the north of Israel is the nation called Aram, A-R-A-M. It was also called Syria, which it is still called today. And the capital of Syria is Damascus. But I'm going to refer to it as Aram because to their northeast was another nation called Assyria, A-S-S-Y-R-I-A. And that capital was Nineveh. And so you have Judah, capital of Jerusalem, Israel, capital of Samaria, Aram, capital of Damascus, and Assyria, capital of Nineveh. And of these four kingdoms, Isaiah served the king sort of as an advisor, or even kind of as an adversary to the king, to kind of talk the king down from believing in his own almost said a bad word, in his own self-righteousness. And it wasn't that bad of a word, but anyways. So Isaiah worked for the king of Jerusalem, who there was basically two kings that he worked for, King Ahaz and King Hezekiah. So King Ahaz was sort of important, and this is where we get kind of all of the prophecies about baby Jesus in the Old Testament. This is where, Isaiah, well, to kind of paint the picture. So King Ahaz, he is, the northern kingdom has joined forces with Aram, and they are aiming to attack the southern kingdom with this combined strength. And so Isaiah comes in and he advises King Ahaz as to what to do. And he says, trust in the Lord's protection. Don't put your faith in military or political alliances. And this is where we get the Christmas prophecies, because Isaiah tells Ahaz that the sign will be a virgin bearing a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel. Well, King Ahaz fails to trust in the Lord's protection, and instead he seeks out foreign help. So he turns toward the Assyrians in the capital of Nineveh, and he asks them sort of to, close in on this alliance between the Israelites and between the Aramites, and they do so. And Assyria comes in and wipes out all of the Israelites and deports them hundreds of miles away to Nineveh. And in return, though, the southern kingdom of Judah is expected to pay quite the tax to Assyria from now on. And so a new king of Jerusalem comes to the throne, Hezekiah. He is righteous. He leads a lot of religious reforms. He returns Judah back to the faithful worship of the one true God. However, and Isaiah places a lot of hope in this new king, Hezekiah. However, even Hezekiah was tempted to trust the military alliances rather than God's protection. And Hezekiah got tired of paying taxes to Assyria, and so he formed an alliance with Egypt, which was something that would have been completely unheard of in earlier times. Egypt, you got to remember, was the oppressor. They were the slave masters of God's chosen people, and now they were aligning themselves with them. This would have been completely blasphemous to a lot of people. In fact, Isaiah calls this alliance with Egypt the covenant of death. And the results were disastrous. Assyria, being the mightiest empire on the face of the earth at the moment, they hear of the treachery of their former ally in Judah, and they go down to attack Jerusalem. And they besiege Jerusalem, and we can hear about this in different books of the Bible. And Jerusalem is only spared when God miraculously sends a plague that wipes out the Assyrian army at the doorstep of Jerusalem. And you can actually read about this both in the Old Testament, but also in the records of the Assyrians, where they mysteriously just abandoned the siege altogether, even though they're far superior to the Judahites. However, the Assyrian Empire was the strongest in the world at the time, and further onslaught is only stopped when King Hezekiah agrees to allow the kingdom of Judah to basically become a slave state to Assyria. And at this point, Judah was reduced to only Jerusalem and kind of the surrounding lands. And they were now essentially under the control of a foreign king. And nearly nothing of the promises and the riches and the glory of David's kingdom remains. And those are the times in which Isaiah lived. So a time of uncertainty, a time of war, a time of people abandoning their faith in God and trading it for earthly political alliances. And I think that we can relate to a lot of those things. We live now in a time of uncertainty. We live in a time of war. We live in a time in which people have abandoned their faith and treat politics as God. Instead of going to church, they watch Fox News or MSNBC. I think it would be advantageous for us to hear what Isaiah has to say to us today. This is what Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest mountain and raised above the hills. All nations shall stream toward it. Many people shall come and say, "Come, let us climb the Lord's mountain to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us in his ways and we may walk in his paths." And that's remarkable. With all the hatred and war and disunity happening all around him, Isaiah is saying that it will be the Lord who will unite everybody together. All nations will come streaming toward Jerusalem. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. One nation shall not raise the sword against another, nor shall they train for war again. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. In the midst of all the wars and all the political intrigue and the backstabbing and the betrayal, the besieging, the deportation from the promised land, Isaiah is saying that a time of peace is on its way, that instruments of death will be transformed into tools of cultivation and growth. And that would have been completely unbelievable in Isaiah's time. But we also live in a time when the world is practically at war again. And yet we hear this message from Isaiah. All nations shall stream toward Jerusalem. One nation shall not raise the sword against another, nor shall they train for war again. And that is the message of Advent. There is no mention of baby Jesus in today's liturgy, the readings or the prayers. This first part of Advent is more about focusing us on the coming of Christ. Our gospel is about being prepared for the coming of the Lord now. Not as a child 2,000 years ago, but now. Matthew says, "For you do not know on which day your Lord will come. Be sure of this, if the master of the house had known the hour of night when the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and not let his house be broken into. So too you also must be prepared, for an hour you do not expect the Son of Man will come." We haven't set up our nativity yet, or our Christmas trees, or even our poinsettias. And that's because the first part of Advent is meant to be more somber. It's about being prepared. And so while we are hopeful that the Lord will turn swords into plows and all nations will eventually come streaming toward him, we have to do our part first. Isaiah promised that the Lord will be victorious, but God's chosen people will have to suffer greatly first. So perhaps to truly feel the sweetness of Christmas, we have to first feel the sacrifices of Advent. So this year, treat Advent like a miniature Lent. Think of some ways to prepare, a thing to give up, a thing extra that you can do, more prayers to focus on. It will never feel like Christmas unless we first prepare for Christmas.